Revelation 2180. From the 8th and the 9th of December 1941. Teaching activity of the beings on the other side through transmission of thoughts. Every spiritual thought finds its echo in the beyond, for it is immediately seized by the beings which are bearers of light and strength and whose task it is to mentally instruct people. They can only have an effect on them when their thoughts rise into spiritual regions, that is when people mentally occupy themselves with such things which lie outside of the earthly. Therefore, the human being must first want to receive enlightenment about these things. He has to let his thoughts wander into areas which are still unknown to him, and he has to awaken the desire to be truthfully informed about them. Only then can the beings of light fulfill their desire. They can force themselves into the human being's train of thought and convey the truth to him in a flash. A thought arising in the human being will never remain unanswered by those beings. They are always ready to give and to instruct. They take up every thought and never tire of their teaching ministry. But they must also immediately give up their teaching activity if the earthly child turns its thoughts to earthly things again, or if the desire for truth, for enlightenment, becomes weaker, for then the preconditions God has attached to the reception of truth have not been fulfilled. It is imperative that God's requirements be fulfilled before God commissions His forces to work in a teaching capacity. If humanity has now reached a certain spiritual low, then every effort of the spiritual beings is unsuccessful, and it is painful for these beings because their flow of strength is not heeded, it is not recognized and therefore not desired either. But no instructions can be offered to them uninvited, and the desire cannot be awakened in them by force. And thus the beings which stand in knowledge cannot spread their knowledge, for the direct connection from earth to the beyond is only very rare, and it will therefore be utilized exhaustively by the otherworldly teachers as soon as a willing earthly child places itself at their disposal. And therefore it will never wait in vain for the announcements. The beings in the beyond are always willing to give because the giving of their knowledge makes them unspeakably happy. The divine powers work so obviously and yet they are not heeded. Again, the otherworldly bearers of light have an easy job with people if their attention has already been drawn to them on earth and they can now take up the human being's train of thought. Then, despite apparent rejection, the human being can become thoughtful and the reflection can be the beginning of instructions which now reach the human being himself. For thinking about it is already enough for the spiritual beings to be able to carry out their activity. Mentally influence him. Increased reflection will begin as soon as the human being's desire for earthly pleasures begins to diminish, for the latter prevent the human being from seriously thinking about extraterrestrial things. But when he begins to detach himself from it, he will also be receptive to mental instructions. That is, he will indulge his thoughts and now receive constant nourishment from the spiritual kingdom. He will ask and be taught. He asks and is taught. He does this unconsciously, for he sees the results as having been gained for himself until he is enlightened from a knowing side. The otherworldly forces remind people again and again by directing the individual's train of thought to such things which stimulate thought, and then they gladly fulfill their task. Every person is surrounded by teaching beings who only ever pay attention to when the person asks questions in order to be able to answer them immediately. However, it is easier when they can communicate to a directly receiving earth child in this way, because then they can introduce the human being to all areas, that they can therefore convey very extensive knowledge to earth and thus spread much light. As soon as the human being endeavors to let this light shine, as soon as he also wants to impart his knowledge to other people, he will now always be used as a receiving vessel for divine wisdom, and thus he will become a bearer of light already on earth. He receives truth and passes it on and is welcome as a mediator to the beings of light in the beyond. For sometimes access to people's hearts is blocked and extraordinary appearances are necessary to guide people back to faith. Amen.